Hey, Steve. Musing from our mountain this evening, the Ozark Mountains of southwest Missouri, not far from Branson. I've been thinking about a topic. I thought I'd do a relatively short video on it, and that is the expression that bad things happen in threes. I'm in the middle of one of them now, and then early in life, I had another experience where bad things seem to happen in threes. Uh, through my years, I've heard the expression a lot. So, I decided to Google it tonight. Why do bad things seem to happen in threes? And came up with a paragraph that says scientists were asked why bad things seem to happen in threes. And the answer was they don't. There's no scientific reason, there's no science, there are no studies to support that when you have two bad things that happen, a third one's bound to happen. But anecdotally, many people will say, well, our experience has been, they most certainly do. It's kind of like people that have fungus on their toenails. You may know this. Vicks Vapor Rub, like you buy at your pharmacy, you put that on your toes. It resolves that. It makes it go away. Uh, Anecdotally, doctors will tell you it seems to work. Are there any studies to support that? Well, back when I worked in healthcare at that time, there were none. But it does work. It does happen. It does cure that. So it's kind of the same way with do bad things happen in threes. Through my years in ICU and ER and healthcare, I heard the expression a lot. And like I said, I'm in the middle of personally a situation where bad things seem to have happened in threes. And I had a personal experience in my teenage years, which is when I started to hear that expression. I'm going to share my personal experience about that and briefly overview what we're in the middle of now, how bad things, unfortunate events have happened in threes more recently. And then if you have experiences where negative things, bad things have happened in threes, you can let me know. It's kind of like, well, when it rains, it pours. You've heard that. Once one bad thing starts to happen, once a few drops start coming down from the heavens, then it's going to pour. When it rains, it pours. It's maybe that's kind of a slang expression or folk expression for kind of supports the same thing. So when I was a teenager, my mother had grown up the first part of her, all her childhood was in Illinois. Long story short, her mom and daddy got divorced. They both had remarried. Mom ended up here in Missouri on a farm, which is a good thing because that's why I was born. And of course, I'm a Missourian, except for a few winters in Florida and Philippines in my life. I've maintained Missouri residency, and I hope I always can. Um, but that being said, that left a whole lot of family back in Illinois. My grandfather had remarried. He'd adopted his wife's three children. They, in turn, were my mom's now brothers and a sister. They married. They had children. There were a whole lot of cousins in Illinois, in Quad Cities there, Moline, East Moline, and that part of the country. And so a lot of my memories, I have many good memories of going back to visit, Grandpa and Grandma. Um, and all the grandkids would come over to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and they had a big treed yard, and we'd play in the yard. And Grandpa had bought playground equipment. I think honestly, as I look back on it, and as a teenager when he shared things with me, I think he really wanted to make his place a really fun place for the grandkids, not just for the grandkids, but so his own kids would come visit him. I'm kind of if you're the parent of grown children, you know what I'm saying. Young folks, once they reach adulthood, tend to get busy with their own life, and they may love you, but it's not the same as that bond that you had when they were younger. Anyway, my story is that I had a lot of good memories with cousins in Illinois. My senior year of high school was 77 and 78, 1977, 1978, and I had two of those many cousins that were my age. We were all in the same graduating class. Now, they were going to school in Illinois, and I was in Northeast Missouri, but when I would go back to visit, because they were age-appropriate cousins, we made a lot of good memories. We worked for Grandpa. We painted for him. We played with the other cousins. Most were younger. And I have a lot of positive memories. And even though some of these cousins were not genetically related to me, they were my family. They were my cousins, and we loved one another. So, it's my senior year of high school. It's late autumn, and we get a call that we'll call my three cousins, the two cousins and myself that were, I mentioned that I was close to. We got a call. There was Denny and Brian and Steve. We were the three cousins that seemed to hang out when I would go to Illinois. And we got a call in late October, early November, something like that, early November, that one of my cousins had been killed in an accident. And, so many years have passed, almost half a century. I'm not remembering which of the cousins that we got the call on first. And the spoiler of the story is both of my cousins that were my age were in accidents in a relatively short period of time. And then there was a third event, which we're going to talk about. Keep in mind the subject of this video. One cousin was on a motorcycle and sitting at a red light, waiting for the light to turn green. I think he'd gotten off work and he was taking his motorcycle home. It must have been a warm night because it was fall time. And this kid, the way I remember the story, this kid was driving his high-performance Chevelle at 80, 90 mile an hour in a 35 zone, right? Figured that he'd just plow through the light because he'd figured, the way I heard the story, was that by the time he got to the light, it would be green. So he never slowed down. Well, he was high and had drank alcohol and didn't see that little motorcycle. This was not a big Harley or a big Honda. This was like a little scrambler, little street bike that my cousin was on. He didn't see him and just smashed right into him. And my cousin's motorcycle became his hood ornament, and my cousin was thrown way in the air. So we lost Brian. My other cousin, Denny, he was coming home, I believe, from Davenport, Iowa, if I remember the story correctly, and he went to pass, and a car popped over in front of him, and they hit head on. I believe in that accident, my cousin was the only fatality. That's what I'm remembering at this point. And whether it was his fault or someone else's fault, the bottom line is accidents are accidents, and we lost two of my cousins. So it was quite tragic for my mom's side of the family. Quite tragic to, there's the three of us. Boom, we lose one. Boom, we lose another. And I heard them talking, who's going to be the third one? Who's going to be the third one? And they were convinced, that when it rains, it pours. What else can happen, right? So this was in November and December in 77. The first week of January, I'm involved in an accident. I was a passenger in a car that, it was very slick. The car, beautiful GTO, wide, 50s series tires in the back and 70s in front, and high-performance Pontiac 400 in it. And we went over a bridge, and the idiot in front of us had slowed down, put his brake lights on, and the driver of this car went to slow down, and bottom line is we lost control, without giving you all the details, and we spun around like this, and we went off at the end. Thank God we didn't bounce off the sides of the bridge, but once we got spun around like this and went off the road, we went over, it was a very tall cliff, basically. It's like a cliff, but it was a long, long, deep embankment down to the river bottom ground. Thank God there was no river right there. The bridge, of course, had covered the river. Now we're in just the river bottom ground. And the car, and we were traveling, we really weren't at high speeds. The small town talk, they were racing. No, we weren't racing. Small town talk, they were drunk. No, my buddy and I were not drinking. It was, I didn't drink. And he wasn't stupid enough to drink and drive. But you know how people talk. That car flipped end over end over end. The car was my buddy, the driver, the owner of the car. I'd found him the car. I'd wanted the car first, but he sold his Camaro to buy this beautiful GTO. And back in the day, we wore the big bell bottoms, blue jeans, and the car was basically a crumpled up piece of paper, and it was crumpled around his pant leg. Now me, I was injured badly, but I'm lucky to be alive. Interestingly, no, we didn't wear seatbelts back in the day. But had I been wearing a seatbelt in that particular accident, I would not be here making this wonderfully entertaining video for you today. Perhaps it was an angel. Perhaps it was Steve, who's always anticipating, what if this goes wrong, what would you do? As my driver's education instructor back in my hometown had taught us, always look for a way out. Always be anticipating, okay, I'm coming across a traffic pattern or whatever. If X, Y, and Z would happen, what would be my way out? What decisions am I going to make? I was pretty sharp that way. So I tend to believe that for whatever reason, it's just my personal belief, you don't have to believe that it happened, that for whatever reason, I had a thought in my mind that I should quickly get on the floorboard because I knew we were going to flip. And we did. My side of the car was smashed down. Had I been seatbelted in with a seatbelt lap belt, and I was up vertical in the seat, I would have been killed. I would have been smashed. But because really quickly I turned around like this, put my knees on the floorboard, and put my head down on the seat of that particular bucket seat, I was spared. I was also, given the fact the car was extraordinarily mangled on my side, more severely injured. I spent time in the hospital. I had multiple fractures and contusions and that kind of thing. But I lived. My buddy, like I said, the car was mangled around his bell-bottom blue jean Levi's. We wore big bell Levi's back in the day, No one's been as cool as us since then, trust me. But he couldn't get out of the car. And I just remember moments because I've had a concussion, and I may have been unconscious for a bit with the head injury, but he had to remove his pants. He took his pants off. Now, mind you, I don't know if I mentioned this or not. This was in December. First week of January. It's wintertime in northeast Missouri. It's cold. It started to snow. It's a really wet snow. The bridge, of course, was very slick. Bridges always get slick before the rest of the road. By the time I remember anything, there was snow on the ground, and this is the river bottom ground, so it's moist, and so he took off his pants because the bell bottom of his jeans was caught in the mangle of the wreck, and he took off his shoes, he took off his pants, so there he is in his briefs. We didn't wear boxer shorts back in the day. Real men didn't do that. The old guys did. But the kids, the young folks, the teenagers in my generation, we'd wear these boxers. He had briefs on, and I remember, I'm just like all dizzy and hazy and coming in and out. And I remember wondering why my buddy had taken his clothes off. This is way out in the country. There are no cell phones. There's no street lights. So he's taken off his pants, and he's in his, apparently in his underwear, his briefs, and his socks, and he's running back, and this car had flipped end over end over end over end, quite a ways from the highway, quite a ways from that bridge, right at the edge of the river. And he climbed to the top of this, and he was cut right here, and to this day he carries like a keloid scar right there. But otherwise he was fine. He was able to go to the top, flag people down. Sheriff's department came. Sheriff's department, somebody put, my bottomless buddy in their car to warm up, I suppose. The sheriff showed up before the ambulance. The sheriff came down, and, I have a background since then in EMS, emergency medical services, pre-hospital care. Ordinarily, you don't want to remove people unless their spine is immobilized and things. But back in the day, everything on TV, whenever it was a crash, you had to get the people out of that car as quickly as you could because it was going to blow up at any time. Not that cars don't explode, but most of them don't. So you don't drag people out of a car because it's going to explode and catch on fire any minute. But back then, that's the way we did it. Because by God, on TV, all the cars exploded and burned up. And they didn't want me burning up. And you know what? I kind of appreciate that. The car, by the way, did not explode and burn up. So I remember them getting me out of that car before the ambulance came and carrying me up to putting me in the police car, in the sheriff's department car. He was the sheriff. I think it was Sheriff Brown. I remember sitting in his car, and I was not oriented. I don't remember a lot, but I remember answering some questions, and I remember thinking how good that eater felt. And I remember telling him, I said, I don't know why, but he took his pants off and ran away. But anyway, I'll stop that amusing story. It's only amusing because, 40 plus years have passed. This was 1978, January. Very cold weather and beautiful GTO. If you're a car lover, it's such a loss. It was a blue metallic, flames on the hood, white vinyl top. Yes, vinyl tops were cool at one time. This one had the factory vinyl top. And 400 4-speed diamond tuck upholstery. Oh, it was just gorgeous show car. But back in the day, we would drive these things all year round. If we had to put snow tires in the back, we would. It's you would never drive a car like that for transportation today. Number one, they're $60,000, $70,000 or more. A car like that one would be today. And of course, the salt that they use on streets, at least in this part of the world where I live, would just, facilitate rust and the ruining of the automobile and the paint quality and all that. But anyway, bad things happen in threes. Brian, accident. Denny, accident. They lost their life. I remember going to the hospital, and my mother had told my grandfather back in Illinois what had happened. And they had already been having this discussion about how bad things happen in threes. They were expecting, the third thing. There was a lot of speculation. What else can happen when it rains and pours? Bad things happen in threes. Grandpa called my uncle, Tom, my mom's younger brother, and Tom drove him. He was quite upset. His vision wasn't the best. He was an older fella. He had glaucoma. He wasn't that old as I look back on it. Probably, I'd have to figure it out to see 38, 50. Yeah, he probably was about the age I am now. But he'd had glaucoma. He'd had a horrible train accident back in the 60s, which is another something else I could share with you, I guess. But anyway, it was probably not, given his emotional state and his compromised vision, he did get my uncle to drive him down. And one of the first memories I have, which was probably a day later, was my grandfather showing up. And they came in. And Grandpa looked at me. He says, I just can't even believe you're alive. We went down there and to the accident site. The car was still there, a mangled mess. Mangled. He says, no one could have survived that accident. No one. Why are you here? And of course, my buddy, short of taking care of his pants and maybe frostbite on his toes, he was even in better shape than me, other than he carries this scar right here. But Grandpa said to me at the time, he says, there is some reason that God spared you and your buddy from this accident. God has some purpose for you. You need to figure out what it is. Oh, man, he was so serious. My grandfather had that voice, a voice of authority. He was a monster of a man. And, of course, when you're a teenager, you look at those masculine authority figures and you look up to them. And when Grandpa would say something like that, it was profound. God has some purpose for you, because Denny and Brian had passed in their accidents. I was spared, so there must be some reason. So now I'm 63, trying to figure out what that reason was. But I've done a lot of good in my life. I've had a productive life. I continue to have a productive life. Lord knows, look at these interesting videos I'm making for Facebook and for YouTube. But there was an occurrence in my teenage years, my senior year of high school, where horrible events happened. Bad things happened in three. And I am so grateful that I was not the third fatality. But it was a horrible accident. In my early 20s, when I would see aunts and uncles and cousins, they would all say that bad things happen in threes. We're so glad you're alive. Well, I was glad I was alive too. Well, I've thought about that. That was a profound, an incredible, number one, Grandpa saying that. It's always been on my mind my whole life. Trying to make good choices. If you're like me and you believe in a loving creator, a God figure, and I do and always have, always will. I've tried to make choices, and where no one's perfect, we make mistakes. But I've tried to always do the right thing. I've tried because I wanted to make sure that I was in a position to be used by God to do whatever He saved me for. Well, I don't know what that would have been. I haven't, well, let's see. I didn't find the cure. I didn't invent penicillin. That was already done. All these wonderful things that human beings have done in terms of discovery or invention. That wasn't me. But anyway, I like to think I've been a positive thing on this earth for the 63 years that I've been allowed to live since that event when I was 17 years old. So later that month, in that same month of January, I was able to turn 18. I was able to graduate school. I was able to work and ultimately go back to school again. And I've had several professions and raised 6 kids, took care of aging parents and other family members, brought people enjoyment with music, and I was a music teacher. And I'd like to think that I've put positive energy back out of the universe. I hope God believes that I was worth saving. But let's fast forward now to recent events. There was a profound time of my life where bad things did happen in 3. Scientists, say they don't happen in 3s, but anecdotally, it seems like they happen in 3s. Recently, and each of these 3 events, the thing that is interesting here, as I certainly had no premonition that I was going to be that 3rd event in my family's life. I didn't have any premonitions, but recently there have been 3 events that I will tell you the story. I don't know if they're premonitions or it's just a weird story, but about a month or so ago, I kept having this feeling. It wasn't a voice in my head where I'm hearing voices, nothing like that. But I kept having a recurrent thought that I typically never had, that I needed to check on a certain cousin. Now, this is not a cousin I grew up with. This is a different cousin on my dad's side. He grew up in California. I met him in my 20s. I was close to his grandmother up in Randolph County, Missouri. His grandmother and my grandfather were cousins. Matter of fact, the long story is, a long time ago, 2 brothers and their mothers, baby brother, if I remember the story correctly, married 3 sisters. They married 3 Cooley sisters there in Randolph County. And of course, then they all proceeded to have a whole lot of children. So there were all these kids that were not only cousins, they were double cousins. Well, because that young fellow that married the 3rd sister was technically the other 2, the 2 brothers' uncle, because of being their mom's baby brother, their kids were not only cousins because of the mothers, but there was an uncle and a nephew or niece relationship as well, or an aunt and a nephew and niece relationship. Back then people had a lot of families. So they would have big Cooley reunions, and they used to have a newsletter I remember out, Cooley Cousins they called it. So I grew up in that environment, hearing the term double cousins and all that. Well, this particular cousin worked in healthcare the same as me. He actually did pre-hospital work on the ambulance, and he worked on the helicopter, and our paths crossed fairly frequently in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And then other than that, it's been Facebook. It's not a cousin I grew up with, this particular cousin, but we had a relationship. And I thought it was strange. I knew he'd been sick. I thought maybe that was it. But, and we had talked on the phone some when other family members had passed or whatever. But it's not like we got together a lot or talked all the time or even conversed on Facebook all the time. We just had open communication occasionally. But I mean to tell you, where I'm going with this is I had this recurrent thought, a recurrent feeling that I needed to check on Robert. And I didn't. And I regret it. I regret it because Robert passed. He passed. And of course, when people are gone, you don't have that opportunity where you can talk to them. So, his funeral was recently. I was not able to go back up to the north part of the state to attend. I would just express my sympathies on Facebook, and he technically was my third cousin, but we were double cousins, so genetically he may have been more related to me like a first or second cousin. So anyway, well, I never thought about this bad things happen in threes, because people pass. There are bad things that happen to good people all the time. But then last week I did another video on this, on my Facebook, at least for those of you that are my Facebook friends. I was contacted that my brother had had a serious accident and was in dire straits. So far, he has survived. His condition is guarded. He remains in an ICU. We hope to travel there this weekend to check on him in person. In the meantime, I'm just monitoring things on the telephone. It's touch and go. That was the second thing. I still was not thinking bad things happen in threes. 3 or 4 days later, let's see, this was like Wednesday or Thursday. By Saturday, they are loading up my first wife in an ambulance. She's the mother of my older 3 children. 2 of my kids live with her, and we were together a long time, 18 years. Well, it felt like a long time for both of us, I suppose. But very serious, and I won't divulge her personal medical history or her diagnosis. She remains in the hospital now, and although my gut feel is she will survive, not sure about my brother, but I believe she will survive. She may never. There's a possibility, given her condition and her comorbidities and this and that she may not be able to continue her life as she has been. Is that a safe way to put it and still guard her privacy? After this has happened, I'm still feeling really bad that I'd not got with cousin Robert. By the way, Robert's middle name was same as my last name. He'd been named after an uncle. So we kind of had that commonality, It was my last name, but it was his middle name kind of thing. And then this happened to my brother. And then within hours, my older 3 boys' mother's in the hospital and still remains in the hospital with no clue as to when she may ever, if ever, be able to return home. And I started to think about the expression that bad things happen in threes. Scientists say they don't. I've had 2 time periods in my life where they did. Coincidence? Probably. But it happened. So what has been your experience? We all agree that sometimes when it rains, it just pours. And sometimes if it's not one thing, it's another. You've heard that. If you're from my part of the world, you've heard that expression. The old Saturday Night Live. It just goes to show you, it's always something. If you never saw that program, that's probably not very funny. But I would be interested in your comments, your own personal experience, your personal perspective on that particular do bad things happen in threes. And with that, I'll say goodbye. And let's hope that the next 3 major events that happened in all of our lives are positive. Bye-bye.